Zulu.
And I'm Kip Stube.
And tonight on Live Talk, we are going to talk about Africa Day.
To join the discussion, phone us directly at this number 001-202-619-2077 and we'll call you back.
And as usual, Live Talk goes out to Zimbabwe on our medium wave frequency on the 4930, 5940 and 15455 kilohertz shortwave, Monday through Friday at 8:30 p.m.
On the internet, you can find us at www.voazimbabwe.com, www.voashona.com, and www.voindebele.com.
They say that charity begins at home. It is not a secret that Robert Mugabe has failed to unite Zimbabwe. A very small country like Zimbabwe, one of the smallest countries in Africa in terms of population and even diversity. We have one of the fewest tribes in Zimbabwe. But Mugabe has failed to unite them. And part of what he has done is Kukurahundi, a genocide, as part of his human rights record.
Unoona zvinoitika kazhinji ndezvekuti munhu kana wakapambwa unogara uine pfungwa yekuti munhu akakupamba ndiye mukuru. Saka munoona zvizvarwa zvekusouth Africa especially zvechitema zvinenge zvisingakoshese kuve vatema pache zvavo.
Ebhinga kule basketry enzima eyenziwa elizweni ebukekayo kuregion yonke isadaki yonke. Ungakhuluma ngeZimbabwe ngakhuluma ngebasketry sikhombela kwele bhinga yibi intshantshi zakhona omama. Kuyabe kufanele baziphiwe imali lezi ukwenzela ukuthi kube lula ukuthi bamarket ama baskets lawo ingcebethu.
Once again, thanks for joining us, and you are listening to Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about Africa Day.
Zimbabwe today joined the rest of the continent in commemorating Africa Day. Africa Day celebrates the anniversary of the formation of the African Union, which is an alliance between 54 member states to address shared issues and represent the continent in international negotiations. The Organization of African Unity, or AAU, was originally formed on May 25th, 1963, and replaced by the African Union in 2001.
The theme for this year, that is 2015 Year of Women Empowerment and Development towards Africa's Agenda 2063. This is a timely theme as it gives gender mainstreaming a renewed momentum to harness political leadership and overcome gaps and challenges pertaining to gender disparities. The theme further adds value to the proclamation of the year 2010-2020 as the African Women's Decade.
What are your views on this issue? If you wish to join the show right now, phone us directly at this number 001-202-619-2077 and we'll call you back. That number again 001-202-619-2077. You can also send us a message on WhatsApp. Our number is 1-202-465-0318. That number again 1-202-465-0318. Yeah,
onga hama dzadiwa nhasi tinoda kuti tinge tichitarisa nezvezuva rakakosha zvikuru rinocherechedzwa musi wa25 chivabvu vega wega, zuva reAfrica Day rino pembedza iro kana kuti kucherechedza kuumbwa kwakaita sangano reOrganization of African Unity iro rava kunzi AU mazuva ano kubva muna 2001, pachicherechedzwa nekurangarirwa nekukurudzirwa kubatana kwenyika dzose dzemuAfrica. Gibbs.
Yebo kambe Zulu kandaba lingalithola njani lapha likhona khona ngapho ke ngemakhaya thina ngapha hayi siphilile sibila kumagama lethemba lokuthi belempela viki enhle kakhulu. Lamhla ke sixoxa ngodaba lokuthakazelela ilanga leAfrica Day. Siyakwazi ke leli langa elikhulu kakhulu njoba kunanzwa ke ukubunjwa kweOrganization of African Unity yona ikhangela ngokuthi kambe iswapho lweAfrica kumele luzilwele njani njalo luthole inkululeko. Siyazi inkululeko ngona yayithola kulabo abamhlophe. Khathesi ke sesikwazi ukuthi African Union kodwa ke lokho ungazani kulokulisana okukhona nxa sikhangela emazweni eAfrica amanengi. Singathi okunye balisana lendlala kube khona ukuthi abantu abaningi basawukile njalo abanye babulawa imikhuhlane etshiyeneyo. Kube njalo lokudubulana ukulwisana kunjalo ingwazana kugcwele emazweni amanengi. So sifuna ukuzwa ngani ukuthi kambe lithini ngokuthakazelela ilanga le-Africa Day. Ye nxa lifuna ukuthi ningene kuhlelo nasi nombolo 001 202 619 2077. Ye khulumani Sizwe Zulu. Kunjalo mfowethu.
Unguka Gibbs, I think we have our first two guests lined up. First, that is Mr. Sabelo Sibanda, a member of Community Initiative Umpondo and School of African Awareness. Mr. Sibanda, good evening.
Good evening, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And of course, Mr. Sibanda is in South Africa. Where specifically in South Africa? Johannesburg. Egoli. And from Washington, D.C., we are being joined by political analyst Gladys Hlachwayo. Gladys, good evening. I'm told you are still having a bad connection there. But we also have from Harare, Grace Chirenje, Director, Zimbabwe Young Women Network for Peace Building. Ms. Chirenje, good evening.
Good evening. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and thanks for joining us.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. Gibbs, you can start the ball rolling.
Yes, starting with you, Ms. Chirenje in Harare. Tell us, what were you doing today on Africa Day, and what was the rest of the country doing?
Well, we were celebrating Africa Day. It also happens to be my brother's birthday.
Oh,
so we have
congratulations.
got a lot to celebrate as a family. Thank you so much. But I think what's important for me and the excitement is around 2015 being declared the year of women's empowerment and development towards Africa's Agenda 2063. So we're doing also celebrating, watching movies, just reflecting on the realities of Africa and where we are today, especially as African women.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Mr. Sibanda. Mr. Sibanda, I know you are a Pan-Africanist. How significant is this day?
It's very significant, but we have to ascertain what the nature of that significance is. Meaning particularly that by right, its significance should be that we are celebrating African independence, we are celebrating African liberation. But unfortunately, as things stand, we cannot afford to be celebrating anything because it would be premature celebrations because there's nothing to celebrate, so to say. So its importance becomes in the commemoration part where we are commemorating African Liberation Day. Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, so I thought maybe I'd lost contact. Yeah, the whole idea, before it was called Africa Day as such, it was called African Freedom Day, or alternatively African Liberation Day, which at the time, under the Organization of African Unity, spoke to the fact that it was a day where we reflect on the part of the continent which was still considered as still under colonialism, and therefore was still fighting for liberation. And from a strict Pan-Africanist perspective, we are saying we are still fighting for our liberation, so we cannot afford to be celebrating anything because there is no African person who is truly free as we speak right now. There is war all over, there is poverty, and we hear that this year was declared by the African Union to be the year of the woman and empowerment. I personally am not aware of a single program that the AU has put in place to empower women at a grassroots level. Yes, we see some tokenism with women being portrayed as being in so-called positions of authority here and there. But in essence, there is nothing happening on the ground. And when we talk about Africa, we're not talking about a land mass. We are talking about the global African nation. So if it's the year of women empowerment, we want to see our women being truly empowered. And we want to hear about programs which are designed at enabling them to be empowered, not a token gesture that for the year we will think it's about the women, and once the year 2015 comes to an end, we totally forget. We should be setting up institutions that will run for as long as the foreseeable and the long-term future.
Thank you so much. For those of you who are just joining us, good evening, and this is Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about Africa Day. Of course, this year has been challenging with Ebola claiming more than 11,000 people, mostly in West Africa. And like Mr. Sibanda there is alluding to, there are also wars in Africa and extremist groups such as Boko Haram in Nigeria and Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Gibbs.
And Blessing, Afrobarometer has just released a report on, presidential term limits. And the survey that is based on 51,600 respondents in 34 African nations indicates that about 3/4 of citizens favor limiting presidential mandates to 2 terms. Now, support for term limits, Blessing, has been consistently high over time and is the majority view even in countries that have never had term limits, or have removed term limits from their constitutions. So when you look at the constitutions of most African countries, some of them don't have specific term limits.
Yeah.
So and the majority of people have been complaining, saying, this is not good enough. But then the survey indicates that more educated citizens tend to express greater support for term limits, right? As do citizens with greater exposure to the news media. So let's get Ms. Chirenze. Ms. Chirenze, can you give us your thoughts about the presidential term limits as what Afrobarometer is talking about here?
I support issues to do with term limits, but I also want us to go back to our reality as Africans. We as Africans are rooted in a leadership style that's deeply ingrained in chieftainship. So you notice that we are trying to shift from that reality into this aspect of presidents with term limits. But clearly it's very difficult in a context like Africa because we are socialized to say when you're a leader, your leadership ceases the moment you die. So you find that even where there are term limits, presidents are always trying to fool around with the constitution in order for them to continuously be in power, which is a challenge. However, I like the fact that Afrobarometer brings to the fore the ideal of having term limits to presidents. And also looking at human nature, you are as effective as sometimes your experience is and over a short period of time. So I think it's good that leadership should begin to change reigns from one generation to the next, but also to say that more women for me would be something that we should think about. And like what Mr. Sibanda said, it's not just about tokenism, but it's about saying that how do we begin to have a conversation of having more than just the males in leadership, especially in regards to presidential terms. How do we also get women to become part of this big piece of the cake?
Thank you so much. Tora mtereri wekutanga mkoma mashawo makadi
tiripo makadi baba
aiwa tiripo maswera muchite yenyu nhasi
America tiri pabasa
muri pabasa
there's nothing to celebrate
sei muri kuti hapana chekucelebrate
because it's like from one master to another. Zimbabwe tanga takacolonized nemabritish izvezvi we are now colonized by our fellow nemango mazimbabweans edu saka and izvezvi zvato even worse pakuti kwekucomplaina paipa ikataita varungu but izvezvi pacho unocomplaina uchiti
asi hakusi kurasa mbere
vakutochuzira ivo mafailures avo wakutora ma-Russians izvezvi muZimbabwe akauya akapiwa platinum ma-platinum claims kwakauya maChina akapiwawo maclaims mafamu machinji and time yamo amagadhafi akauya akapiwa mafamu kunana inyanga saka it's like from one master to another saka hapana chekumbocelebrate
asi kakudyidzana pane chakaipa here nhaye mukoma Marshall kana America chainodyidzana neChina one
aiwa but zviri kutredwa zvacho ka takapiwa oil ka mukati takapiwa oil neLibya oil yakapera kudhara but Libya izvezvi ichine maclaims echi izvo zvemadiamond debase yakaya muno muZimbabwe 93 from 93 are you telling me kuti hakuna aiziva kuti debase iri kutora madiamond up to 2006 ichitora madiamonds ichiendesa 3 trucks every month to South Africa nemadiamonds hanzi tikutora masamples from 93 to 2006 someone mugovernment aitoziva kuti ndozvikuitika izvo zvemadiamonds akunzi akusisina debase yakazobuda yaona kuti hamusisina madiamonds apadhuze nekupera saka ndatoda kuti izvezvika even pakandipa another government kana tsvangire zvakuchemera kutonga izvo akanzi apinda izvezvizvi acha kune inonzi law of inonzi mutemo yokuti another government inofanira kuona ma-agreements akaitwa ne-previous government anofanira kungoita ona those agreements asiwa ne-present government saka it's like from one enslavement to another there's nothing actually government ikapinda inenge tori pama-one way those zvikwereti zvakawanda ende ma-Russians akati no isusu platinum itakaipiwa kudhara saka hapana it's even worse
aiwa tinotenda zvikuru mukoma Marshall nekupinda muchirongwa chedu.
Okay.
I think you heard it from Marshall. He's saying nothing to celebrate. It's from white oppression to black oppression. Nothing has changed. The anthem was the independence was mere flag and anthem.
Yes, siwe ubaba Sibanda. Ngamafutshane baba Sibanda uyazwela lapha uyakhuluma umnumzana. Uthi nxa sikhangela uzibuse weAfrica kwakuthi ufaka iflag kuphela bese kuhlatshelwa nenational anthem entsha. Ngani kunjalo phela?
Uqinise kakhulu mayesho kanjalo ngoba angithi into ekhona la ukuthi laba akade besimbezele bathe bebona ukuthi uncindezelo lwabo selubasinda ngoba sekusifa abantwana babo abanengi kakhulu bakhetha ukuthi hayi okulula ukuthi kuhlalwe phansi kukhulunywe umuntu onsundu kuthiwe-ke hayi usungakhipha iflag leyi ebikhona ufake yakho uzazenzela wena ngokufuna kwakho ungene uhlale laphana ema-ofisini usungatshintsha le national anthem ubhale yakho ucule ngendlela ofuna ngayo kodwa konke okunye okuningi ngokwethu siyasala lakho yikho uthola ukuthi la namhlanje indaba yomhlaba ilokhu isakhulunywa kuyo yonke indawo nje Afrika indaba eyomnotho njengoba ebesho uMarshall naye ngendaba yama-diamond ukuthi kanti kahle kahle ama-diamond sekuleminyaka emingaki kwazakela ukuthi kulama-diamond eZimbabwe kodwa intuthuko kasiyiboni ukuthi isebenza kanjani uyibeka kahle futhi mayethi esenanzelela lapha ukuthi bekulombuso wabelungu oloncindezelo sekujika sekusiba ngumbuso wabensundu nawo loncindezelo futhi iAfrika yonke nje bese simangala ukuthi kanti kwenzakalani sithi masizwa bethi sekuxoxwa abelungu sekubuya futhi amaChina sesizinxusela thina omunye umncindezeli obevele ngekho ekuqaleni kulokuthi sithuthuke sisiya phambili njengama-Afrika siyazincindezela thina simane sinxusa nje abancindezeli ukuthi bezosimoshela impilo yethu njengama-Afrika.
Siyawuzwa kakhulu ke Mnumzana Sibanda ubambe ungayikatshana. So what you are saying is that Mr. Marshall is right, to say that independence came in the form of a flag and an anthem and nothing else. He says today you can even say that the land issue is still a big question in most African countries. And when you look at the national resources of each country, there's a lot of plundering, like diamonds and Zim. So he says black oppression is a big issue. And to put the situation worse, the Chinese, he doesn't like it. He says, at the end of the day, it's another form of oppression, So Africans are oppressing themselves.
Of course, for those of you who are just joining us, good evening. And this is Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking, of course, about Africa Day. But surprisingly, Gibbs, there are few countries in Africa that have actually declared Africa Day as a holiday. I think that's something that we need to discuss with Mr. Sabelo Sibanda. And there are only 6 countries. That is Ghana, Mali, Namibia, Zambia, Lesotho, and Zimbabwe. Of course, in some countries, there are, of course, celebrations and also celebrations by Africans in the diaspora. Mr. Sibanda, why is it that this has not been declared a holiday continent-wide?
Because it's a reflection of the fact that Africa is not united, and the aspirations behind the Organization of African Unity for the total liberation of the continent has not yet been realized. So it would be big-time hypocrisy for all of us to be declaring it a public holiday, just as much as it is hypocrisy now for the 6 countries that you are mentioning to be declaring it as a holiday if the reason is celebration. If the reason is to sit back and reflect and see how best we proceed with our quest for liberation and freedom, then it is justified. But otherwise, it cannot be for purposes of celebration. And since the tendency in making days public holidays is to celebrate one thing or the other, there is no reason why anyone should be celebrating. For instance, here in South Africa is very, very clear that they didn't get liberation and they didn't get freedom. On the contrary, they say they got constitutional democracy. And the situation basically means that the necessity to continue fighting for liberation is a reality that each and every African has to contend with. For instance, look at a scenario like the Sudan. Look at maybe, let me not just confine it to the Sudan, the whole of the Arabized North Africa. Why is it that the OAU, right through into the African Union, regardless of the clear knowledge that the northern part of Africa is still under Arab colonialism, and there is slavery, and there is a very clear discrimination of Africans, the African Union does not challenge that. On the contrary, you've got a scenario where you've got pan-Arabs who at the same time are saying they are pan-Africans. How can you be both a pan-Arab and a pan-African at the same time? It's practically impossible. So definitely there is no reason why those Arab countries which are in Africa should be celebrating anything to do with African liberation, because that will be in conflict with their Arabization agenda, because their idea is to take over Africa by Arabs, not for them to be celebrating any advancement in as far as Africans are concerned. So they have a reason not to celebrate, as much as we don't have a reason to celebrate, but to commemorate the liberation aspect of the day, that we have to go back to the drawing table, restructure how this whole process of liberation has gone wrong, and see exactly how we go forward to liberate ourselves as African people. In as much as that liberation entails reparations, the African Union is totally quiet about the issue of reparations. And we are saying now, as ordinary Africans, we want our reparations. There are so many wrongs that have been committed against us from as far back as the 7th century by the Arabs, and then later 17th century coming through the Europeans. Slavery and colonization and neo-colonization. Those aspects we need to get corrected so that we can advance as a people and as a continent.
Thank you so much. Ms. Chirenja, are you back on the line?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I lost you there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Just a quick one. This is from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, and this is what he said, and I quote, Africa leads the world in female representation in parliaments, and the continent is one of the highest rates of female entrepreneurship. Let us be inspired by these successes and intensify efforts to provide Africa's women with better access to education, work, and healthcare, and by doing so, accelerate Africa's transformation. What is your take on these remarks by Mr. Ban?
I think for me, it's a good statement of goodwill, but I'm not very comfortable with the systems like the United Nations and the African Union, because first of all, the women who are included in these systems do not have necessarily the power to make the decisions. So, of course, brilliant documents, I must say, they're brilliant documents, brilliant policies within AU, within SADC, within even the United Nations itself. But coming down to the realities of African women, this does not tally, because statements can be thrown all over. But the reality of the matter is that the commitment and political will towards transforming the realities of African women is something that leaves a lot to be desired. We can look at issues around health, around education, around whatsoever. We find that there is very little progress when we look at it. But I also would like to appreciate the fact that at least it's there at the back of their heads to say that African women are progressing. But what kind of progress are we witnessing? Because, yes, we have the highest population of women, but what kind of lives are these women living? What kind of inclusion do we look at when we say African women are there in parliament? Take Zimbabwe, for example. Yes, we do have women in parliament, not just in Zimbabwe, but even SADC itself. There are a lot of women in parliament. The figure is high. But what are they doing in this parliament? You know, are they really making the decisions? Do they have the power in terms of making the decisions? So I think we need to begin to look at the qualitative aspect of it and not just the quantitative aspect of women's realities in issues to do with leadership.
Thank you so much. Titore Mumtereri Gibbs. Mkoma George Magadi.
Mkoma Blessing.
Aiwa tiri nani zvedu Mkoma George vari paBotswana apa. Manga muchiite nhasi paBotswana?
Unfortunately enough, Botswana calendar year in African Day. In a 100 African Day in 29 May. So I go for holiday. And Panagana animation of African Day, African what is shit.
Aiwa Mkoma George ndira kuti murambe makabata todzoka kwamuri timbotora ka break. Mr. Sibanda and Ms. Chirenje, please do stay on the line. For our radio listeners, we are streaming live. Go to www.voazimbabwe.com and press on Live Talk. This is Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Gibbs Dube saying stay tuned.
For those of you who are just joining us, good evening, and this is Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about Africa Day. Of course, Africa Day is the annual commemoration on May 25 of the 1963 founding of the Organization of African Unity, or OAU. On this day, leaders of 30 of the 32 independent African states then signed a founding charter in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. In 1991, the OAU established the African Economic Community, and in 2002, the OAU established its own successor, the African Union. Gibbs.
And of course, our guests tonight are Mr. Samuel Banda, who is a member of a community initiative, Upondo, and he belongs to the School of African Awareness. He is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. We also have Ms. Grace Chirenje, who is the director of Zimbabwe Young Women Network for Peace Building. If you wish to join the show right now, phone us directly at this number, 001-202-619-2077, and we'll call you back. That number again, 001-202-619-2077. Kulaba wasanda usiqhuma zulu kandaba nxa lifuna ukuthi lingene kuhlelo khona manje lapho esikhuluma khona ngokuthakazelela i-African Union kumbe lokho sithi i-Africa Day. Lisifonele kunombolo leyi 001-202-619-2077. Lingafona kanye salifonela khona ngapho lapho elikhona. Sesingaqhubeka mfowethu.
Tangatina Mkoma George Parunare. Mkoma George, taurai zvenyu muri kuona sezuva re-Africa Day.
Zuva African Day hapana zvaro. Ifeki tikangoti tinongolipa vanhu off yekuenda kuenda kubasa. But it doesn't really mean anything kuvanhu ordinary people. Zvinobatsira ma-politicians kuti vanokwanisa kuwana platform yekuita gather apo vanhu zvakaita South Africa. Like yesterday, I need to write my preparation of this day. So my politicians are going to want a platform because we're running already into this and that. But if you can talk about economic sense view, can I keep an eye not going to benefit ordinary people? Why? Because to win to the next African country, you need a visa. And I will go in the water. You see, they are not referred to a peace job, but rather they are visiting. Can I say you are prosecuted or deported? You see, so it doesn't benefit anything. 90 days ago, no Botswana, Munanga itola kupimari, Zimbabwe, and we check a peace job.
Yeah,
but rather they punish you for taking any slight job that you want to take. But that is those things not the kind of Zimbabwe, I went to South Africa, but can I give a board or you to visit? You don't go say I'm going to look for employment. So the stumbling blocks already in Africa. You see, especially when I going to Europe, you see, my European countries, one of the go and now to pay what my boss.
Yeah.
But our leaders, they are just there with it's one of their meetings, they would want to my allowances, when I got this above or Otera, whatever this and this, but I should benefit one. And after all, my meetings are how they don't focus on Africa development, but they focus on having a permanent member in the United Nations. It's not as no matter because after all, the language in Botswana muna mukana muna chirwara anokaenda ku hospital kana clinic mutwana mbadara 5 pula for whatever, you see. But in foreign anenge ari muno kana muna kana tora kana batsirwa mwana we are forced to pay 3,000. You see, we're going to have disparities. You are penalized because the service is not supposed to be your service. And the Mario Badara is times 1,000. So where does Africa comes in? Murungwato rinani because kana uchifamba uri Blake Botswana. Kaza ngalima president unobvunzwa permit kana passport. But murungu abvunzwi.
Aiwa Mkoma George tinotenda zvikuru ngoti nguva yedu ndo yaita shanje.
Okay.
Asiti notenda shukuru. Of course, George is touching on a number of key points. He is saying that the fact that you need a visa to travel to Botswana, where he's staying, shows already that there are serious problems there. And he's also saying that migrant workers are not very welcome in Botswana. And he also touched on the Mediterranean Sea crisis, migrant crisis, where many Africans are perishing in the Mediterranean Sea, trying to cross into Europe. He's saying those are signs that this so-called African unity is, really something that is still problematic, because there's no unity and there's a lot of suffering.
Challenging times indeed, Blessing. We've got Mr. Evans on the line. Mr. Evans is in Zimbabwe. Mr. Evans, good evening and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. What are your views on Africa Day?
Oh, yes, Africa Day. I think when the organization was formed, the objective was to achieve political independence. And the objectives naturally should then be progressive. Once the political independence was achieved, the shift was supposed to the focus was supposed to shift. And maybe to focus on monitoring and strengthening democracy and good governance in the African countries, within the African countries. And that has not been effectively done. You know, the peer review mechanisms for SADC, SADC tribunal, and I think we should have gone to the extent of forming an African parliament. And I hear
the African parliament is there.
Yeah. Yes, the African parliament to deal with African issues.
It is there.
To form an African Union state by army and a court that is steps in the right direction. But after democracy and good governance, then development should then naturally follow. Then African leaders have suddenly become the world's richest people because there haven't been any review mechanism or strengthening monitoring mechanisms to monitor if there is good governance in African countries. If we are ruling our people very well.
So now, yes. What is the way forward? What is the way forward, Mr. Evans?
The way forward is to strengthen democracy and good governance in African countries. Yes, to monitor each other so that we make the African people happy. You know, these problems of xenophobia and the terrorist groups that are forming in Africa. It's because of poor governance. And the one thing I would want to mention, we only achieved black rule. It's not necessarily majority rule in Africa. Because only a few black elites are benefiting from the liberation of African states, but not the majority. And I would also want to mention one thing. The liberation of African liberation has very strong roots with terrorism in Africa. The liberation movement brought terrorism in Africa.
In what way?
And for example, here in Zimbabwe, you hear the ZANU-PF guys say, if we lose, we'll go back to the bush. Going back to the bush to do what? Obviously to commit acts of terrorism, to sabotage the ones who would have won. Because they have a terrorist background. They have remained terrorists even when they are leaders, they are ruling.
Evans,
that is why they don't respect the human rights.
Evans, when we disagree, we don't call people terrorists. I think there are better terms that we can use. They are undemocratic. That sounds more like it.
Right, continue, Evans.
Okay. Yeah. We
10 seconds.
We may have different words, but I think to me that's the right way to put it. Yeah. So I'm saying the focus then should be on strengthening democracy and good governance in African states once we got that independence. And I think that has not been emphasized by the African leaders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans, and have a great evening, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, don't forget to come back again, even if people differ, right? Take care. So maybe I think he may have touched something that people are overlooking. You know, this issue of majority rule. So there are some academics who call it it's not necessarily the rule by the majority. You know, this majority rule. So it's a fallacy, so to speak. So maybe we'll throw that question to one of our guests as we proceed. Yeah, do we have any caller?
Yeah, I think he also said there's need to set up an African parliament. It's already there. It was set up in 2004. That is in March, the Pan-African Parliament. Whether it's effective or not, I think that's
another issue,
a question for another day. But Mr. Sibanda?
Yes, sir.
Are you surprised by these sentiments from our callers? It appears many people are disgruntled.
No. There is no reason to be surprised at all. Reality has hit home for a lot of ordinary Africans, whereas Evans says that there is the majority and there is the minority. The minority is basically singing from a different book altogether, singing a song which is totally unrealistic and unrelated to the song that the majority is singing. And so people are beginning to realize that all along we've been told a lie, and we have been celebrating a lie in the belief that Africa is free, whereas in actual fact there is no freedom that Africa can be celebrating, which is where I would differ with Evans, that he seems to see a progression where he believes that Africa did attain political independence. There is nothing like political independence if you cannot even rule your own country in the manner that is conducive and beneficial to the interests of the populace of that particular country. For as long as neo-colonialism is an issue that we have had to grapple with and had to deal with, it's a sign that we are not free. That is why we talk about a flag independence and an anthem, because within the confines of the flag independence and the anthem, you cannot really make any meaningful laws through your own legislature that are designed at upsetting the interests of the West and whoever else in as far as your own country is concerned. So for as long as you are in that scenario and you are not in a position where you can make your own laws pertaining to your land and your resources, then you can never ever be said to be free. So we cannot be talking about institutions of democracy and good governance, whereas in actual fact we don't even control our politics. All that we have is politics that is being run by politicians. We don't have politics, which basically speaks to systems of governance. It's just playing around with the gullibility of the people. He who has the most tricks is the one who stays in power. That is the basic agenda.
Thank you so much, Gibbs.
Now let's go back to Ms. Chiranji. Is she on the line? Ms. Chiranji, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Is it not surprising that there are some slaves in Africa right now, in countries like, Mauritania? And then we've got this suffering that has actually gripped Africa in terms of women not being able to do what they want and all those kind of ills. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the problem that we have, and I like the gentleman that spoke about good governance. I think that after we got our independence as African nations, the systems of governance of those that colonized us are still the systems that we're using. And sometimes we do not understand fully the kind of systems that we're working with, because these systems oppress the very Africans that the Africans are now leading. So I think it still becomes a problem. And I think the slavery aspect begins with our thinking, like Bob Marley is saying about mental slavery needs us to emancipate ourselves. So unless we come to a point where we view culture as a way of oppressing women, for example, we will continue to perpetuate slavery in our different spaces as Africans. So we need to, first of all, liberate ourselves from the mentality that sees the other person as a subject or subordinate, and say, how do we begin to hold hands and lead at a level that promotes each and every African to get them to a certain level. And I think we also need to come up with policies and laws that serve the African people. I like the aspect that we're talking about in terms of the theme for 2015, that's focusing working with women towards Agenda 2063. It's all about economic empowerment and emancipation. It's all about getting Africans to unite. But we need to begin to say to ourselves, what does it mean to be an African? What is this Africanness we're talking about? Before we just pull systems of governance that we've had from the past, what does it mean to be a democratic African state? I think those are some of the issues we need to grapple with in order to see women's emancipation, or even the emancipation of Africans in general, and do away with this slavery mentality.
Sibuye baba khonapho ke Sibanda. Nxa sikhangela ke ukubhekana labo mama, siyeza ukuthi kulalokho kuthiwa i-theme yankhona yalonyaka. Kodwa ke ubona ngizani kuzayenziwa yini khonokho abantu bazakwenza? Kumbe vele ukukhuluma nje?
Singakukhangela ngempilo esesingathi sesijwayele kwesikubonayo. Hayi inkulumo nje baba bayazixoxela, akulalutho abazalwenza oluzasisa ndawo. Angithi yabona ukuthi batsho nje bathi balungiselela u-Agenda 2063. Kodwa iqiniso elihle ukuthi u-Agenda 2063 yena lowo akayenziwanga ngabantu, bazenzele sebefuna abantu bengenele bekuthiwe bayingxenye yento yonke yenziwayo makuthuthukiswe umbono ka-2063 ngoba ngowe-Afrika yonke. Mase sikhuluma iqiniso njengeqiniso, bazenzela banxusa abantu ukuthi bezovumelana lakhona lokho vele asebekwenzile. Abantu akade bekhethwa ngoba kucatshangela ukuthi lo singambiza akasoze afike aphikise kakhulu, uzavumelana lalokho esikufunayo. Lo singambiza uthola ukuthi abantu bakhona bebengena namhla kukhulunywe zabomama, kusasa kukhulunywa zamayuthi, kusasa kukhulunywe zomnotho. Ngabantu abafanayo ababhodiswayo nje, kusuke kuyiwe eLesotho, kusuke kuyiwe eNairobi, kusukubhodwa nje kusenzelwa ukuthi kubonakale sengathi abantu bakhulunyisiwe ngakho. Kodwa ngathi sikhangela iqiniso, abantu abanengi abayazi vele lokuthi 2063 kukhulunywa ngani. Yikho beqala nje ukuzwa kukhulunywa 2063 sebuza hawu kanti yini yona le i-2063. Yikho sesifikela sesigabeni sokuthi kumele sigijimise indaba ethiwa yi-reparation. Ya ngoba iqakatheke kakhulu, ngoba kumele ukuthi iyenzakale lakithi ezama-Afrika ukuthi sivuselele ubuthina bethu, ubuntu bethu nokuzazi kwethu njengama-Afrika.
Siyakuzwa kakhulu ke ungayikatshana baba Sibanda. So he's saying that the 2015 kind of theme for the Africa Day is some kind of yes and no, like this is the leaders' kind of theme. Because when they talk about Agenda 2063, that's their own thing. They crafted it themselves. So he says in most cases these leaders always come with certain things like women, youth, empowerment, and they're all over the map. So he says this does not work. People must start talking about reparations. That's the way forward. Yeah.
Regaiti dzoke kwamuri muzvare chirenje tichitarisa dingindira re gore rino paafrica day rekusimbisa kodzero dzemadzimai. Mungati pane chekupemberera here muafrica tichitarisa kuremekedzwa kwekodzero dzemadzimai?
Chekupemberera sekuona kwangu tinokwanisa kufara hedu kuti dindingira iri kunangana nemadzimai, asi tichinyatsotarisa upenyu hwemadzimai muno muafrica tine zvinhu zvati kunyuta nezvazvo zvakawanda. Takatarisa nyaya yeutano, kune nyaya yeibhola iya, tinoona kuti zvipatara zvinonyatsovakwa zvakanaka, madzimai achiri kushushikana kusununguka vana nekuti zvipatara zviri kure, kana kuti vaya vanenge vachimirira kubatsira vanhukadzi vana mazvikokota eutano vanenge vari vashoma pazvipatara izvozvo. Tinoona kuti takatarisana nenyaya dzakanangana nemadzimai dzinobata utachiona hweHIV, tinoona kuti pane zvakawanda zvichiri kuda kuitwa kuti madzimai asimudzirwe. Kwatarisazve nyaya dzakanangana nenyaya yedzidzo, hongu zvakanaka kuti zvakutanga kuzongo madzimai anofanira kuenda kuchikoro, ngatirasei tsika yekuti mwanakomana anotaura kusimudzira zita reZimba ndo obva oenda kuchikoro. Asi tinoona kuti madzimai vachiri kumanikidzwa kuroorwa vari vana vadiki, voshaya mikana yekuenda kuchikoro, zvinova izvo zvisina kuve zvakatsarukana. Zvakawanda zvokunyunyuta nezvazvo, pane zvatienderana nezvazvo. Tambotaura nyaya yeutungamiri payanzadzi, tinoona kuti madzimai vari muzvigaro zveutungamiri vashoma. Tinoona kuti nyaya dzinobata masangano anoita zvematongerwo enyika zvinoita kuti madzimai apotsererwe kure. Tichikangamwa kuti madzimai anofanira kusimudzirwa kuti vawanikwe vari muzvigaro zveutungamiri. Saka hongu zviri pazvo pamwe zvokuti tichiri vapenyu hatisati tafa tikupembera, asi upenyu hwacho hwatiri kurarama muno semadzimai muAfrica upenyu hwekumanikidzira, nekuti kana mari chaidzo zvishoma kuti pane mari dzekutenga mabhizinisi nezvimwe, tinotarisa nekuti ndinda madzimai ndinda yavainayo inenge iri mishoma. Saka zvese zinyaya dzekuti hongu dindingira riripo, asi zvinomboreveiko dindingira racho hongu rinonangana nemadzimai, iwo upenyu hwedu husingaite sei, husingaenderani nedindingira irori. Uye kutaura kuti ikekupedzisira ndichiti munoona nyaya iyoyi yedindingira inoitwa nevarume. Varume vari muzvigaro variko kuAU. Makauya muno musadhaki kana muno muZimbabwe kudobvunza madzimai kuti chiiko chinombonzi AU uye dindingira kuti havazvizivi, nekuti zviri kumusoro-soroko isi madzimai tiri pasi panapa tiri kungoedza kubata apa nepapo kuti zvinhu zvitiendere mberi. Saka ndinoona kunge hazvizi ngori zvedindingira, zvinofanira kuona kuti upenyu hwemadzimai hwashanduka kuburikidza nezviri kuda zvikuitwa nevatungamiri vava vekuAfrican Union muzuva rakaita sanhasi reAfrica Day.
Aiwa, tinotenda zvikuru. I think like Gladys has put it, so rather Grace has put it, she's saying for African leaders it's important that people must actually walk the talk. It's not enough to just say women empowerment without empowering the women.
Now let's get back to you, Mr. Sibanda. It seems as if there is a certain generation that does not even understand what the war against colonialism was all about. Tell us a bit about this, just briefly.
No, that is very true. The reason being that after the war, instead of our so-called liberators dealing with the issues of curriculum so that people can understand the part of our story that led to colonialism and therefore the necessity of the war and therefore the necessity to protect the gains of the wars, they maintained a foreign curriculum, which curriculum is still in place today. We are still basically learning what we now refer to as his story against our story. We have our story interpreted and written by the white men, and we have not really made much of an impact or an input into our story. If that had been properly addressed, we would not be having, for instance, on the 1st of August, a reparations march. It is all in an attempt to reclaim our identity and also reclaim the ability to tell the young people who don't understand what the war was about, what exactly the war was about. This is one of the reasons why we are also now pushing for a boycott of the Apartheid Museum in South Africa, because that is part of our story that has been stolen by white people. Whereas the idea was conceptualized by a black man, they took it and now are running it as a commercial venture, whereas he had done it as part of that whole process of self-repair, part of the process of reparations, that we can know who we are as African people and go through that pain and trauma of slavery and colonialism and therefore be able to heal going forward. But because it has been stolen, it is now something totally different. And the young people cannot relate anymore to what the fight was about because they've bought the lie of the Rainbow Nation. And that's exactly what has happened throughout the continent. We have deprived the young people of the ability to understand and therefore relate to our story. That is why the necessity, I go back again to the issue of reparations. That is part of the reparations argument.
Let's bring in Ms. Grace Chirenje. Ms. Chirenje, talking about peace building, this is one of your briefs. Why is it so difficult to end these conflicts in Africa? And the majority of them are actually affecting women. We have the 200 girls that literally vanished in Nigeria. There are sexual abuses where there are these conflicts. What can be done?
I think the problem that is there is that issues to do with peace and security are mostly led by men. Men are the ones that mostly perpetuate wars, crimes of war. And when we then look at it, few women are brought in as part of the negotiating teams, which means that the realities of women as people negotiate for peace are sometimes totally disregarded. So in that regard, you also find that wars are very complex. It's not just about the war that you see, say, Boko Haram is coming in Nigeria and now they are getting these, abducting girls and so on. It has to do with power, it has to do with money, it has to do with other resources. And I think it's very important, as the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 that speaks to including women when we look at issues to do with peace and security. It is good that women begin to form the majority of redefining issues of peace and security. And wars will come, wars will always be fought, but it is also important to realize that women bear the brunt of these wars. And once we bring them on board as part of the negotiating teams, as part of the peace brokering teams, it will be easier to facilitate for wars closing. And also, even looking at the aftermath of wars, it's critical that women become part of this reconstruction because they understand the realities of these wars. So I think once we begin to do that, we will then understand what it means to have women defining their own.
Unfortunately, I think we have a bad connection there, but the program was coming to an end anyway, so we want to take this opportunity, of course, to thank our guests this evening, Grace Chirenje of the Young Women Network for Peace Building, and also in South Africa, Mr. Sabelo Sibanda, member of the Community Initiative Umpondo and School of African Awareness. Mr. Sibanda, thank you so much. It appears we have lost him as well. Yeah. But of course, we also want to thank our viewers, our listeners, our callers, those who send messages on Facebook and WhatsApp, and of course, our team behind the scenes, our engineers and producers, signing off and saying, have a blessed day. This is Blessing Zulu in Washington.
And I'm Gibbs Dube. Good night.